you asking about Bria, but I'm officially 3 for 3 on being fined by the WNBA.
Holy shit. For this? For the pod? Again?
They didn't like my comments on Paige Becker's.
No way.
I didn't even say anything bad.
The words came out like a confession that would shake the foundation of women's professional basketball forever. I'm officially 3 for 3 on being fined by the WNBA, Sophie Cunningham said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had just pulled back the curtain on one of the league's darkest secrets. What started as casual commentary on her podcast had spiraled into something far more sinister. A systematic campaign of financial intimidation that would ultimately cost her everything. But Sophie wasn't backing down, and what she was about to reveal would expose a culture of fear and control that the WNBA desperately wanted to keep hidden. The basketball world erupted when Sophie dropped this bombshell, but this wasn't just another player complaint. This was different. This was a rising star in women's basketball, essentially declaring war on the very organization that employed her, and the casualties would be devastating. Known for her explosive plays on the court and her fearless voice off it, Sophie Cunningham had just signed her own professional death warrant. All because she dared to speak the truth about what was happening behind closed doors in the WNBA. The story begins with what should have been an innocent comment about Paige Becker's, the Dallas Wings rookie who had been making waves in her debut season. During a routine episode of her podcast, Show Me Something, Sophie made what seemed like a throwaway observation. She mentioned that Paige had what she called a sharp whistle, essentially suggesting that referees were giving the young star favorable treatment. In any other sport, in any other league, this would have been forgotten by the next news cycle. But in the WNBA, it was treated like treason. Within days, Sophie received notification that she was being hit with another fine. Not a warning, not a conversation. A direct financial penalty for simply stating what millions of fans were already discussing on social media during every single game. The message was clear. Speak out of line and it will cost you. But what the league didn't anticipate was that Sophie Cunningham wasn't the type of person to be silenced by intimidation tactics. The pattern that emerged was as shocking as it was systematic. Every single time Sophie released a podcast episode, she could practically set her watch by the fine that would follow. It didn't matter if her comments were positive, negative, or completely neutral. The WNBA had apparently decided that any uncontrolled narrative was a dangerous narrative. This wasn't about protecting the integrity of the game. This was about maintaining absolute control over every single word that came out of their players' mouths. But here's where the story gets truly twisted. Sophie wasn't being fined for saying anything false or malicious. She was being penalized for making observations that any reasonable basketball fan could see with their own eyes. When she pointed out inconsistencies in officiating, she was fined. When she discussed the league's operational challenges, she was fined. When she made positive comments about other players that the league deemed inappropriate, she was fined. The WNBA had essentially created a system where honesty itself had become a punishable offense. The financial details tell an even more disturbing story. Sophie received a $500 fine for a TikTok video where she simply lip-synced to lyrics while mentioning referees. Not even direct criticism, just a playful social media post that thousands of athletes make every day. Then came the $1,500 penalty for her very first podcast episode, where she had the audacity to suggest that referee quality might be inconsistent. Most recently, she faced an undisclosed fine simply for observing that Paige Becker's seemed to be getting favorable calls. An observation so mild it wouldn't even register as controversial in a casual conversation between friends. The process itself was designed to be as humiliating and intimidating as possible. Sophie described how she would be approached by her team's general manager, often in front of other staff members, with the ominous words, "Come here, Sophie. I have to talk to you." Without any detailed explanation or itemized reasoning, she would simply be informed that another fine was coming her way. No due process, no opportunity to defend herself, no transparency about what specific rules she had supposedly violated. What makes this situation even more infuriating is the blatant inconsistency in how these penalties were applied. While Sophie was being financially hammered for every comment, other players were making similar or even stronger statements without facing any consequences whatsoever. Angel Reese could openly discuss Caitlin Clark's special whistle, during a televised press conference and face 0 penalties. Kelsey Plum could stop entire press conferences to criticize referees and walk away without a single fine. Other players regularly express frustration with officiating in post-game interviews and on social media, yet somehow Sophie Cunningham had been singled out as the league's primary target. The culture of fear that the WNBA had created was having a chilling effect throughout the entire organization. Multiple sources confirmed that other players shared Sophie's concerns about officiating and league operations, but were terrified to speak publicly because they had witnessed what happened to those who dared to voice their opinions. The league had successfully created an environment where athletes were more afraid of their own organization than they were of any opponent they might face on the court. From a business perspective, the WNBA's approach was nothing short of catastrophic. Sophie Cunningham had become one of the most compelling and marketable personalities in women's basketball. Her social media presence drew massive followings. Her authentic personality connected with fans in ways that traditional league marketing never could, and her podcast had become must-listen content for anyone who wanted real insights into the WNBA. Instead of embracing this organic connection between athlete and audience, the league treated it like a threat that needed to be eliminated. The contrast with other professional sports leagues couldn't be more stark. In the NBA, players might receive fines for criticizing referees, but the amounts are proportional to their massive salaries, and the comments usually have to be intentionally inflammatory and direct attacks on specific officials. In the WNBA, a player could be fined hundreds or thousands of dollars, representing a much larger percentage of their income, for comments that wouldn't even register as newsworthy in any other sport. But Sophie's impact went far beyond just her own situation. Her willingness to speak openly about the league's problems had given fans something they didn't even realize they had been missing: a player who refused to hide behind corporate-approved talking points. When she launched Show Me Something with her co-host Wes Wilson, the intent was simple: have genuine, honest conversations about basketball and life in the WNBA. What they discovered was that speaking truth to power in professional sports comes with a price tag that most players simply aren't willing to pay. The fan response to Sophie's treatment revealed just how hungry the basketball community was for authentic voices. Social media exploded with support, with fans calling her a truth teller and demanding that the WNBA stop silencing players who didn't fit their carefully crafted narrative. Comments poured in from supporters who were willing to cover her fines, who applauded her bravery for saying what other players were thinking but were too afraid to express, and who saw her as someone finally willing to hold the league accountable for its failures. Even respected figures within the sport began acknowledging what Sophie had been saying all along. Rebecca Lobo, one of the most recognizable voices in women's basketball, openly admitted that there were serious problems with officiating in the WNBA. Yet when active players like Sophie highlighted these same issues, people who were actually living through the consequences of inconsistent refereeing every single game, the response wasn't understanding or reform. It was punishment, plain and simple. The league's tone-deaf response reached its peak when Commissioner Kathy Engelbert was forced to address the officiating controversy during the All-Star Game. Her words were polished and diplomatic, assuring everyone that officiating remained a priority and that the league was working on improvements. But her statements rang hollow to fans who could see that instead of listening to legitimate criticism and working toward solutions, the WNBA seemed far more interested in silencing the voices raising these concerns. The breaking point came when it became clear that the league's punishment system had become completely divorced from any reasonable standard of behavior. Sophie was facing financial penalties for making observations that any casual viewer could see during broadcasts. She was being fined for positive comments about other players, for discussing league operations in general terms, and for simply existing as an authentic voice in a sport desperately in need of genuine personalities. The irony of the situation was profound and tragic. The WNBA had everything it could have asked for in Sophie Cunningham's content: an authentic voice from within the league, commentary that engaged fans deeply, and discussions that sparked genuine interest in the sport and its players. Instead of embracing this organic marketing goldmine, they treated it as an existential threat. They had taken what should have been a celebration of player authenticity and turned it into a cautionary tale about organizational control and fear. Sophie's resilience in the face of this systematic intimidation only strengthened her impact and influence. Every fine seemed to validate her points about the league's broken priorities. Every penalty proved that she was touching on truths that the organization desperately wanted to keep hidden. Her determination to continue speaking honestly, despite the financial consequences, created opportunities not just for herself, but for meaningful dialogue about the future direction of women's professional basketball. The situation represents a defining moment for the WNBA's identity and future. The question facing the league is fundamental. Do they want to foster an environment that values and amplifies authentic voices from their athletes? Or will they continue to silence them in pursuit of a tightly controlled public image? Every decision they make is being closely watched by fans, players, media, and potential sponsors who are all taking note of how the organization treats those who dare to speak honestly about their experiences. Sophie Cunningham's story is ultimately about more than fines or commentary or even one player's career. It's about the soul of professional women's basketball and whether there's room in the WNBA for voices that refuse to be controlled, sanitized, or silenced. Her willingness to pay the price for honesty has exposed fundamental problems within the league that go far beyond officiating or operational issues. Problems that strike at the heart of what it means to be an athlete in a professional organization that seems more interested in managing perceptions than addressing realities. The question now is whether the WNBA will learn from this controversy and embrace the authentic voices that could help the league grow, or whether they'll continue down a path that risks alienating the very players and fans who represent their future. Sophie Cunningham's brave stand has already changed the conversation. The only question remaining is whether the league will be wise enough to listen.